Here to discuss is syndicated columnist for the Toronto Sun, former advisor to Canada's Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, and international fellow with the Centre for a Secure Free Society, Candice Malcolm. Candice, hi, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Candice, are you in favor of Canada accepting these Syrian refugees?
Well, you know, it's one of those things, Liz, that Justin Trudeau made a big promise during the Canadian election campaign. He made this big, large political gesture. And now, as of 3 days ago, Canada has already admitted 25,000 Syrian refugees. So I certainly have concerns about the way that these refugees have been screened, vetted, and certainly the security implications that this has, not just for Canada, but for the United States and for the rest of the world. You know, Canada and the U.S. share the world's largest border. We're the world's largest trading partners. We want to be able to keep that border open. But when we're bringing in Syrian refugees that we aren't really sure exactly sometimes who these folks are, it can cause a major security threat for Canada, and it can strain our relationship with our closest trading partners. So I'm a little bit skeptical of Trudeau's policy here.
All right, yeah, because the video that we just saw, that's very heartwarming. It looked like those refugees were thrilled to be there, that they probably come from very difficult times. But we also have to balance that with what's been a big concern in America by the American people, and that is whether, like you said, that these people aren't vetted very well. Are there terrorists coming in? What is Canada doing to make sure that they're vetting these individuals properly before allowing them into the country?
Well, you know, Canada has a bit of a luxury over Europe. Europe has just thrown its doors completely wide open, and they have no idea who's coming in. Canada at least selects the refugees individually. So we send Canadian officials over to the United Nations camps that are set up in bordering countries. They do the interviews. Canada and the U.S. have a shared database, so we check you know, security, immigration, criminal background. But there's certainly a missing element. Syria is a failed state. We can't exactly verify people's information with local officials. And there's a black market for fake and stolen passports. So it's easy for people to pose and pretend that they're refugees, even if they're not. And ISIS has made direct threats. We know that ISIS is trying to plant its agents in with the refugees to try to sneak them over to do another big attack like we saw in Paris. So we know what the enemy is trying to do. And I think Canada is taking more security steps than Europe, certainly, but it's not a perfect process. And I think that's what people like me and a lot of folks up in Canada are really worried about.
Right, and my question would be, is it enough? Is it possible to be enough? Because like you said, there's not really a mechanism, there's not really a government over there to be able to check their records. So is anything that they do, even if they're trying to be thorough, even if they're looking at all the data, you mentioned the Canadian-American border before. I mean, this doesn't just pose a threat to Canada, it poses a threat potentially to the United States as well.
Exactly, and government is imperfect. They're always going to make mistakes, especially when you have such large numbers. Canada has already accepted 25,000, and they're going to bring in another 25,000. That's 50,000. You know, Canada is a country 1/10 the size of the United States with much fewer resources. It was a significant concern. A Lebanese cabinet minister said that about 2% of the population that lives in the UN camps are actually members of ISIS, and those are the exact camps where Canada is choosing its refugees from. So, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think the government needs to be able to take their time. Officials need to go thoroughly and slowly. And that's the opposite of what Trudeau is trying to do in Canada, is trying to speed things up and fast-track everything. It's totally the wrong approach.
Right, and it, like you mentioned before, it has been a cornerstone of his campaign, not just while he was running, but he's continued that. We actually have a tweet from him. He's clearly using this as a marketing tactic, bringing these Syrian refugees in, welcoming them. How does this sit with the Canadian people, Candice? Is this a popular policy?
You know, it's popular among the elites and in the media. They push this perception of Canada as this great humanitarian country. And, you know, it is a good thing to take in refugees, but usually you take in refugees after a war, not in the middle of a war when the enemy has declared war on you, and it's the same group of people that are the refugees. So actually, there's been public opinion in Canada recently that 70% of Canadians oppose Trudeau's refugee policy. 70% say do not let a single more Syrian refugee in until we solve the crisis with the Islamic State and with Assad. So, you know, Trudeau is bouncing around in la-la land, you know, taking selfies. But when you talk to everyday Canadians, they feel totally different, and there are legitimate security implications of this policy.
Why is Trudeau doing this then? If 70%, like you said, of Canadians don't approve of this, there are other risks too. It's not just a risk of Islamic State fighters, which is probably the scariest risk, but there's also economic threats that come with allowing that many people in all at once as well.
Right, and Canada has a very generous welfare state. So, we have universal government health care, and a lot of people from around the world want to come to take advantage of that. So, Trudeau likes to go around and sort of pat himself on the back as being an altruist, and I'm sure there's pockets of support in major Canadian cities and the downtown crowd, which is sort of what Trudeau goes for. But I think that they're really going to have to convince the Canadian people that they're taking the proper security measures and convince their American allies and friends as well that we're not cutting corners and endangering the security of the entire continent, which could harm other aspects of our relationship. Like I said, we're the largest trading partners in the world, and we can't risk, that border being closed. So I think that Trudeau's making a bad decision here. He's sort of in the honeymoon period. He just got elected in November. He's only been in office for 4 months now, and I think it's going to be. Sooner or later, he's going to have to wake up to reality that this isn't a very popular policy, and it potentially puts us all at risk.
Right, and it doesn't instill a lot of confidence in us, not even the Canadian people, but in the American people when he refuses to listen to his own agencies, when these resettlement agencies are talking about being overwhelmed and asking him not to stop the program altogether, but just to put a pause on it so they can catch up and do their vetting thoroughly. And he essentially ignores them, Candice.
Right, and those are incredibly important people because these are the people who are working on the ground, helping to resettle these refugees. There's a threat right now of an ISIS agent slipping in with the refugees and causing some kind of a large attack. But there's also threats in the long term. When you have populations that get resettled into a country, you have to make sure that they integrate, they make sure that they learn English and that they have skills that can get them into the economy so that they don't set up isolated ghettos in cities. And that's exactly what you see in Europe, where there's all these areas in Paris where police won't even go. They call them no-go zones, and they're basically governed by Sharia. And those create huge security intelligence problems for countries, and we have to make sure that that's not going to happen in Canada. So again, Trudeau is riding high, but he really needs to listen to the officials on the ground, the people who are working with the refugees. It's fine to make grand gestures. There's a lot of people suffering in Syria. Maybe there's something we can do to help the minorities, the Christians that are being persecuted. But you have to do it properly. You have to take the right steps to screen and vet and make sure that these people aren't coming to Canada to do harm to us or aren't going to try to sneak into the U.S. and do harm down here. And I think Trudeau would be very wise to listen to his officials.
Right, and it's hard for me to believe at this point that when a leader is at that high profile of a position, the Prime Minister of Canada, that it could be naivete. He knows what he's doing. He's not purposely putting his nation at risk, but he's willing to do so for political gain. And to me, that's something that people need to be talking about. People need to stop because it's our lives that it's going to end up affecting. Candice, I appreciate you coming on the program. It was great to talk to you.